Hey, this is Seth at Music Teachers Muse. Tune in Fridays PST at midnight for new episodes. See you there. All right, welcome back. Today we are discussing the challenges of driving to students' homes. So if you are new to teaching music lessons at all, you probably start off teaching in a store or a school environment because that's primarily what we cover on this channel because that's the experience that I have. I've taught at independent music stores and music schools, except for Guitar Center, which is a chain store, but it's still a music store. And I've also driven to students, which has been a really cool experience, but it definitely has a different set of challenges and parameters to go with it because it's just very different than being in a store or a school, and it's a lot less structured too. So let's just jump into what those challenges and differences are. So number one, the distance and the traffic. You can't have consistent students as much because you have to drive to them, whether they're 5 blocks away or 5 or 10 or 20 miles. It's just a factor that you have to add in. So you have to leave earlier, you have to arrive a little bit early, and it's just one of those things. So just add in extra time for your schedule because that's a thing it's a obvious reality. So, just accommodate for that. The second thing that you're going to have to make sure of is that there is parking. So you always want to arrive early. If you don't do that, depending on in LA here, that could be debatable if you're going to get there on time anyway, even if you leave an hour early because of traffic. But like at the students that I drive to right now, they have street parking at their place. One of them I can park right at their house. It's not a problem. If they have a house, it's better. Apartment tends to be street parking only, which is a real son of a bitch, depending on time of day and the area that you're in. So a lot of times you're lucky if you get a spot that's even just down the block. So accommodate for extra time to look for that. Try to get as close as you can with whatever it is that you've got with you. The third thing we're going to cover is you have to supply your own equipment for this particular endeavor. You're going to need your instrument plus whatever the students' materials are, cables, picks, your own small practice amp of some sort, possibly a music stand. The student won't have any of that. They'll have their own stuff when they get there, but it's not like when they come to you at all where all that's provided in a store or a school environment. You might play your own instruments in those environments, but everything else you have to provide. And it's not a problem because you can write it off on your taxes anyway. Anything that you have in this profession, you're able to do that with. The fourth thing is where the lesson actually occurs. So most people, even the people in my private clients currently are in the Pacific Palisades, the ones I drive to anyway, which is a really ritzy area north of here in LA. And even though these people have $1 million homes and living rooms that are the size of most people's houses, entire houses, they have a specific spot where the lesson takes place, but they don't have a dedicated music room or anything like that. So you might be sitting at the kitchen table with not very much space between you and the student, or like the one student, there's a glass table that sits about right here, so I have to back up to make sure I don't bump my guitar on it, and then the student sits across, and then I've got my amp over here. He's got his amp in the hallway because it's a really small house, but and then they don't have a music stand either. If you tell them to buy one, they usually won't. So you might want to suggest that for like a Christmas idea or just birthdays or whatever goes along with their other gear that they have. But it's just, you might also be sitting on a couch in the living room. You might have a room, like one of my clients, I go upstairs before COVID to their room that they actually had all their instruments in and everything of that nature. So that was a dedicated room for that. But most of the time, that's probably not the thing, because the music thing will be a thing that's just a hobby, like most of your students, where they're just going to have an area where you can do the lesson, but it's not a dedicated like practice room or anything like that. Next thing you want to be aware of when it comes to this environment is the distractions that you will incur when you're doing the lessons this way. So in a store or a school, you're going to have a dedicated usually isolated, if not always, room that is specifically, like a guitar center. The rooms were soundproofed and had really thick glass and had the padding on the walls for soundproofing. And at even a mom and pop store, you're going to have a room that's set aside just for that, that's secluded from the rest of the area. In this case, you don't have that. So you're going to have pets and other siblings and nannies and instruction across the street, and sometimes screaming children from the other siblings that this kid has, who have to close the door because you can't hear what you're talking to them about because their sister is having a tantrum or something, or the phone rings, or like the dogs will come up and want to be petted and all that, which I love that because I love animals, but there's a potential distraction that can make your job much harder. So you have to just bypass that and just kind of brush it off, because it's just part of the environment and you get used to it. But it's definitely something that you want to be aware of, because sometimes it's really noisy and it's not quiet. It's hard to concentrate, but you just have to keep your cool and be a pro and adapt in that environment. And once you do enough of it, like anything else, you become good at it. The next thing you want to be aware of is that it always takes longer than the allotted time you have booked with the student, due to the drive time to get there. A lot of times, even though they know, like I said, the lesson starts at 3 o'clock, you'll get there 5 to 10 minutes before. The kid will not have his or her materials out. They'll be sitting there playing their PlayStation or their Xbox or whatever they're doing on their phone, and the parent will have to tell them 3 and 4 and 6 times, hey, like in my case, Seth is here, you get your stuff around. And you can be adamant about it too. It's like, hey, dude, we got to start in 5 minutes, I got another student after you. And you'll still have to tell them 2 or 3 times. After I tell them a couple of times, I'll let the parent deal with it, or whoever is the guardian or their nanny for the day. Because it's like, again, when you get there, it's like that clock is ticking, and when you show up, you're only being paid from the time you show up till the time the lesson's supposed to end. So if the kid wants to fart around for 10 minutes and waste 10 minutes of his lesson time, that's on them, not you. So just be aware of that. Also, it could take longer just if you just need a few extra minutes to explain a concept to the student so they can understand it better. Between then and the next time they can practice on it. Or you usually want to take some time and tell the parent or whoever is watching them for the day what they've worked on, so that you get some positive reinforcement, so that they know their money is going the furthest it can and they're getting what they're paying for. That reinforces that it's a good thing, and you just want to do that anyway because it shows progress and that you care about the student's progress. That always takes some extra time, but if you have the time, give it to them, because it's worth it, especially if you get a long-term paying client out of that. Nextly, you want to make sure that you don't accommodate them more than you really need to. Like, far as taking longer than it should, the best example I have is the one lady that I did lessons with. It was her 6-year-old son, but it took almost double the length of the lesson because I had to wait for her to open the garage door, because there was no parking on their street at all, and then wait for him to come downstairs, and I had to pull in the garage and then go upstairs, and then the kid never had his stuff out, and then a half-hour lesson easily turned into 45 minutes to close to an hour. And it was not a client I'm actually glad I don't have that client anymore. Very nice family, but was not worth the extra pain in the ass that they eventually turned into. The kid was a good kid, mom was nice, but the inconvenience didn't make it worth keeping them as a client. And so it was a necessary thing that actually COVID just nuked them doing lessons in person anyway, and when I reached out to them again, they didn't bother to reestablish that. But it took long, especially with that student, it always took longer. So just be really aware of that. That's always a potential possibility. I mean, it's always a fact when you're doing in-person, in-home lessons like that. But this was an extreme case that I wouldn't bother to repeat again, unless I was charging them way more than I was, because it's not worth your time to do that. The next thing you want to be aware of is that in this case, whether you're doing in-person, in-home lessons at their home or not, the scheduling is up to you. So you have to be on top of, this time, this day. You can be more flexible you do have more time to do that, and it's actually nice in a way because you're not just delegated to, say you're at the store these 3 days of the week. If this next week they can't do Thursday and you've got Friday open, then you can schedule them that day, and it actually makes it to where you can teach any day of the week that you're available, so you can be more flexible, and they will really appreciate that. So keep that in mind. It's more of a pain in the ass. Some of these people they don't make my life absolute hell, but sometimes it's ridiculous getting them to confirm a date and time. And some of them, they take a decent amount of time to get back to you, like several days or better part of a week to return a text. So just keep on top of them. Always be nice. Always be cool, even though you're going to get pissed off, because there's no way it wouldn't piss you off to some extent. Because like some of my biggest complaints about current society, if you can't take the 3 seconds it takes to return a text, I know you're busy, but give me a fucking break. You know, it doesn't take that much effort at all. And your phone tells you when you have a text message, so don't tell me you didn't have the time. And there's some leeway, reasonable amount of time, but more than a couple of days, come on. You know, I need to know so I can plan my own schedule. So just keep on top of them and be consistent about it. They will eventually get back to you, especially if it's a client you've been doing business with for a while. You know they're going to be good about that. If it's a new client, you just got to feel them out until you know kind of what the procedure with them is. Everybody's a little different. Next thing you want to make sure is, we talked about this and how much should you charge for your lessons, that you should at least at bare minimum double the rate if you're driving to them. No exceptions on this one. You're driving to them, you're giving them the convenience of not having to leave their house, you're bringing what you do to them at your own time and expense. So there is no reason at all why anyone should balk at whatever your normal rate is. At bare minimum, double that, sometimes more, depending on the distance you have to go and how much of a pain it is to get there. You know, everybody else in any other business has a reason for what their product costs. We don't sell physical product, but we do provide a service, and it's just as valuable as anything else anybody sells for whatever reasons that holds that value. The last thing you want to make sure that you have, without any exception at all, is you need a list of policies and procedures that is to be adhered to concerning payments, cancellations, and general operational guidelines, which we are going to cover in the next episode. So let's recap. So for driving to students, here's the challenges and parameters of such. So first, you've got traffic and time that you have to add into your schedule to make sure you get there on time, depending on how far you got to go. So make sure you just do that and add it in and prepare accordingly for that. Second thing you got is parking. Make sure that you take extra time, get there early. It might be street parking, you might have a dedicated parking spot at their house. You just never know, especially if it's street parking, and especially if it's in any part of LA. Best of luck to you. Parking's a bitch here. But in a big city, period, but only big city I've ever lived in is here, so that's what I know about that. But it can be a real pain in the ass. Third thing to remember is that you're responsible for providing your own gear. So you need a music stand and your own practice amp, depending on which instrument, unless you have an acoustic guitar or a uke, but even they make electro ones for those. You know, your own tab sheets, all that stuff, and it's obviously not provided because you're not in a store or a school environment. So just make sure you have everything that you need, and that'd be good, because you know, and that list will grow as you accommodate students as it goes, but that's any environment you're in. The next thing to remember is that you don't know where the lesson's going to take place necessarily, especially when it's a brand new student. It might be the living room, it might be a dedicated room that they have sectioned off from the rest of the house, it might be the kitchen, it might be outdoors on the patio, especially right now if you're driving to students during COVID. Depending how freaked out they are about all that, you probably won't even be allowed inside their house, and it's not because they're being dicks, it's just because they're being cautious. So, and I can't blame them for that, especially when they got kids in the house, they don't want to get sick. Nobody likes being sick anyway, but you know, just accommodate for that. Sometimes it's not the most comfortable because you're not sitting in a chair like this. You might have a chair that kicks way back, and you almost fall back into it, and you have to adjust to be able to hold the instrument right and all that kind of stuff. So just take that into account. Next thing is always keep in mind that the lesson will always take longer than the booked time that you have. So make sure it's worth it, because it always is if you get a student that sticks around for even a few months, because it just is. But the kid takes longer to get their stuff around. They're not prepared when you get there. You have to find a place to park. Then you have to make sure that they know what the kid worked on after the fact, depending on how difficult it is to get to their place of residence. Like I mentioned with the one lady, I had to wait for her to open the garage door. It can take another 15-20 minutes or longer. But if you feel it is worth it to do that, to give them that, then by all means do so, because it's going to benefit you in the long run, and they're going to be happier with your performance as a teacher. The next thing you want to keep in mind after the lesson always takes longer than booked is remember that you want to make sure that you charge double for driving to students' homes. Whether they're 5 blocks away or 5 miles or 10 miles, the further you have to go and the more of a pain in the ass it is to get to them, the more you should charge. But make sure it's at least twice the amount of your normal rate if you're doing online and in-person lessons. Don't budge on that. If they wanted to be a cheap ass or pay less, they should come to you. That's just common sense. Next thing is you have to remember is the scheduling is entirely up to you, but just keep in mind that it's a good thing for the most part, even though it can be a pain in the ass because the communication can be difficult. You can schedule lessons on any day of the week that works for you and the client, so they will be happier with that, as well as you're not dedicated to only certain days of the week. Depending on how full your schedule is, that's a case-by-case individual teacher basis thing, but it is a fact. The next thing, last but not least, you want to make sure, absolutely with no exceptions, you have a list of policies and procedures that is adhered to concerning payments, procedures of how the general operational guidelines, cancellation policies, and anything that's included that's pertinent. So thanks for tuning in and watching. Please hit the bell for new videos, subscribe, like, share. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Check out our sponsors in the description below, and we will see you next week.